Arguably, one of the most important artifacts of Mormonism, the object on which its existence seems to rest, is missing. We do not have the golden plates, and only a few have claimed to have seen them, though how these plates were seen is open to significant interpretation. Valuable because the material that they were supposedly made of, their supposed ancient origin and their content, Cumorah's treasure, has succumbed to a mass-produced text used for proselyting and instruction. And not only the plates, but the so-called Urim and Thummim is also missing, as well as some other artifacts associated with these items of Cumorah's treasure. Question is, how is this to be explained? I guess I would suggest, in a most profound way, that it all depends on where one looks and what one is looking for. Mark Shearer and I have these periodic conversations about the perspective of a historian and that of a theologian. Mark thinks his job is harder than mine because anything I say just, is very subjective and is not dependent on any evidence. But we do understand that they are two very different approaches, and I want to suggest to you that I probably am approaching things far more from the significance of a theologian than a historian, although you cannot always separate those two disciplines. The theologian will usually be a little more concerned with things as they appear relative to their significance of what they seem to represent. Faith, after all, as St. Anselm has said, seeks to understand. And so that's probably my biased spectacles that we will be looking through. So let me begin by saying that as far as I'm concerned, the traditional apologetic language used to tell the tale regarding the miraculous events surrounding the reception of Cumorah's treasure has been relatively deceptive, but perhaps also wrong-headed. It does not take into account much about Joseph Smith's own life and that of his dysfunctional family and its environment and his compensatory agenda. I would suggest that Joseph Smith and those earliest converts to the Book of Mormon, even as it is being dictated and coming into being, that budding Christian primitivist movement that moment began to birth, were strongly influenced by social, political, cultural, and religious environmental elements of their times. One of the characteristics of their lives were that they lived in what some have deemed to be an enchanted world, a world of magic. Not the way we construe magic today in terms of something evil or get carried away with Harry Potter, but something that was descriptive of the world of the early 19th century in upstate New York. I believe there is no reasonable or responsible way to understand the advent of Latter-day Saintism and its early artifacts without exploring the issues of enchantment framed within the earliest expressions of faith, and that would include the Book of Mormon. Early 19th century peoples lived in a pre-scientific environment that was hard-pressed to provide clear answers to many of life's perplexing questions. Many of those issues, dilemmas, and problems pervaded their experience. They frequently looked to what Mark Shearer calls a parascientific solution. that is, divining rods. What Oliver Cowdery was told to use in order to receive inspiration. Seer stones, magic charts, sacred drawings, talismans, almanacs were all a part of this enchanted world. And such practices were not seen in their day and time as irrational or irreligious or strange, because that was the world that people inhabited. You see, a case could be made to suggest that the success of the church birthed in the womb of the Book of Mormon is at best in part attributable to the amazing relevance of the Book of Mormon narrative to the folk beliefs and people's search for theological relevance in perplexing times. Joseph Smith's own family, scholars have written for us, suggest that they engaged in many mystical dimensions that represent the early 19th century. Finding buried treasures held a great attraction for many. If one was successful, one would find release for a family from the burdensome debt that they were subject to. It's kind of like winning the lottery today. For treasure seekers, financial security was just one shovelful away. You see, kind of like the lottery. Treasure seeking lay at the intersection of the material world and the aspirations and desires of a religious seeker. These intersect critically in what we, I hope, are focusing on tonight. And Joseph Smith apparently inherited this interest of treasure seeking from his father. Now, understanding that Joseph Smith's treasure seeking had significance here, I want to quote from Mark Shearer. He says, treasure seeking activity is an important key to understanding the discovery, recovery, and translation process of the metallic plates of the Book of Mormon. When Joseph experienced the visions of deity, he experienced what was commonplace to his era and his community. I was fascinated when I read the definitive biography of Jonathan Edwards, who inhabited the New England expanse almost a century before the church ever was dreamed of. He went in the woods one day, as the biographer shares, dismounted from his horse, knelt in a wooded area, and had an experience that is very parallel to what Joseph had. It was not a unique experience of Joseph's. And close associates like Martin Harris continue to report faith-promoting testimonies about Palmyra treasure digging and the appearance of a heavenly spirit in his life, or in Joseph's life. Seeking Cumorah's treasure took place, we often forget, annually at the time of the autumnal equinox. It was not until I was quite a mature adult that it dawned on me how significant that was. You see, that treasure was unattainable on his initial attempt to secure it. That was not unusual in an enchanted world, and there are a lot of descriptions of this. But treasures were always hard to secure. They were often called slippery. And the reception of a treasure on that day of September 22nd, 1827, correlates wonderfully with the world of enchantment and with the world of a religious seeker. Joseph is reported to have dug up a box that contained the plates on this auspicious date. Soon Smith would begin to translate the plates. It was claimed that a device was given him when he obtained Cumorah's treasure. That device was traditionally referred to as the Urim and Thummim. The dictation of an initial manuscript began in his home in Harmony, Pennsylvania, and in these early months it is held that some characters were obtained from the plates and written down. Some of us were viewing those in some of our workshops this week. But following the loss of those 116 pages of dictated manuscript, many things changed. Neither the Urim and Thummim or the metallic plates seem to have had great significance for the resulting dictated text other than to create a story of origin. I've always found that to be curious. Seeing is believing, but feeling is truth, says Mark Shearer. 11 men were prepared by Joseph for visionary encounter. I want you to hear that language. 11 men were prepared by Joseph for visionary encounter. Careful analysis of the testimonies of the 3 and 8 witnesses, as well as their separate statement in the years that follow, strongly suggest the visionary nature of their experiences. All 11 witnesses, in addition to Joseph Smith Jr., shared a worldview that included guardian spirits protecting slippery treasures that moved through the earth and just beyond the reach of diggers or treasure seekers. Although none of them denied their visions of the plates, several admitted that the experience was seen through visionary eyes and not natural eyesight. This phenomenon, of course, is known as second sight, and this seeing with spiritual eyes was common to a description of the experience. John Gilbert, who was one of the printers in the print shop that published the Book of Mormon, related a conversation with Martin Harris. He said, "Martin was in the office when I finished setting up the testimony of the 3 witnesses. I said to him, 'Martin, did you see those plates with your naked eyes?' He goes on to say, Martin looked down for an instant, raised his eyes up, and he said, 'No, I saw them with a spiritual eye.' Later, Harris would claim to have seen them by the power of God." Notice the language. The language moves toward domestication. From the world of enchantment toward the world of domestication. We would have said, where I grew up, where language was not the King's English, he cleaned up his language. And yet, those who numbered among the 8 witnesses testified that they hefted metallic plates having an appearance of gold. Others thumbed these metallic plates while covered with cloth. One must ask, however, whether the object hefted was actually gold rather than a representative object depicting Cumorah's treasure, because no one actually saw them. There is a difference between the hefting reports that report those plates coming in at 40 to 50 pounds and what gold plates would actually weigh based on Smith's description, which would come in closer to 170 to 180 pounds. Perhaps we're on a firmer ground, and this is where I'd come to my conclusion. Perhaps we're on firmer ground, far firmer ground, in claiming that the Book of Mormon was a 19th century work dictated by one who saw himself a seer, becoming a prophet, becoming a second witness that Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God, manifesting himself unto all nations, and that the stories associated with the metallic plates are at best meant to be supportive of the narrative. They are imaginative construals and constructions told in its own time, not necessarily significant to the witness of the Book of Mormon and the message that it was intended to convey, but that talk of such things have been able to provide a record to explain the phenomenon.